Hello, welcome to the video about conclusions for the GenBio 1 lab notebooks. So the conclusion job is pretty difficult because you need to think about what the results mean or what they are telling you about what's happening in your kombucha jars. And so on the week that you're doing conclusions, you do not do them right away. The first thing that's going to happen is the result person or persons are going to need to do their work, and then they will tell you what they saw, or you can read what they saw. So you don't start conclusions until after results is finished. Conclusions is explaining why in this case, conclusions is explaining why the experimental jar or jars look the way that they do compared to the control. And so let's say that you put, I don't know, cloves in your experimental jar, and it is not fizzy and there is no SCOBY, which is suggesting that the microbes are killed or otherwise impaired and there is no fermentation. So the stuff that I said after suggesting is what you write for conclusions. Why are we seeing in our experimental jars the differences from the control, or the lack of differences from the control, as the case may be? And so when you're writing the conclusions, again, you're explaining what the results mean. Explain why you saw the results that you saw for the experimental jars in comparison to the control. It's important to have a control so that we know what's supposed to be happening in your kombucha jars. Your explanation could be about your explanatory variable. So if you added allspice, then your explanation could be about presence of spice or amount of spice, or however you have phrased your variable. If you made a change and you just cannot find any good documentation, so part of the way that the conclusion person gets an idea about what to explain is the rationale that your group has dug up for the experimental design part. So if the rationale just does not match what you're observing, then instead of talking about the explanatory variable, you could talk about the process of fermentation, or you could talk about the health of the microbes. But you must, in some way, explain why the experimental jars look the way that they do, and that is the job of the conclusion person. Although the conclusion person does have a challenging job, they are not on their own. You each will need to be the conclusion person, and then ultimately one of you will be the conclusion person for your poster. So it's going to be really important that you work together to make sure that everyone actually understands what the results mean or why your jars look the way that they do. And so again, the conclusion person will get input from the result people about what is happening in the jars, about what the jars look like. The conclusion person is also going to get input from the experimental design, specifically the alternative hypothesis. Does the prediction match what's being seen in the jars? If yes, then you can just rewrite the rationale in your own words as the conclusion. So because you guys will be keeping the notebook for several weeks, you'll be able to look back at your previous alternative hypotheses and use those to inform your conclusion. So the conclusion is difficult and requires some careful thought, but the conclusion person is not on their own and should be able to get help from other people or look back at previous notebook entries to get some insight about what's happening.